In a galaxy that worships death, there is one God who teaches life through decay. Listen carefully, and you will hear it, the sound beneath the silence, the wet breathing of entropy itself. While the Imperium builds its cathedrals to the golden corpse upon his throne, while it burns heretics and prays for purity, there exists another faith. A faith that does not demand sacrifice but offers embrace. A faith that does not fear the end but celebrates the becoming. Nurgle, the Plague Father, grandfather of pestilence, lord of all that festers and thrives in ruin. To the unenlightened, rot is horror, the end of all things, the final humiliation of flesh. But to those who truly see, decay is not curse. It is affection made manifest. It is the universe's most intimate touch, breaking down the barriers between self and other, between life and the great churning cycle that contains all existence. There is poetry in decomposition, though few have the courage to read it. Watch a corpse return to soil, and you witness not death but transformation. The rigid boundaries of identity dissolve. What was once I becomes we, becomes the worms that feast, the spores that bloom, the gases that rise like prayer into uncaring void. Nothing is lost. Everything continues, endlessly recycling, endlessly reborn in new and glorious forms. The Imperium calls this heresy. They scrub their altars until the stone bleeds. They burn their dead until even ash cannot remember what it was. They fear the natural order of things, terrified that if they stop scrubbing, stop burning, stop denying, they might discover a terrible truth. That the universe does not care for their purity. That life persists not despite decay, but through it. That in the heart of every rot, something laughs. And that laughter is not mocking, it is welcoming. It is the sound of recognition, of a father seeing his children and knowing them as his own, no matter how they arrive at his garden gate. Nurgle's gift is paradox incarnate. He offers suffering that becomes ecstasy, wounds that bloom like flowers, death that refuses to die. Where others see disease, he sees connection, billions upon billions of microorganisms working in harmony, a society more perfect than any Imperium could dream. Where others see endings, he sees the infinite cycle. Nothing ever truly ends in Nurgle's garden. It simply changes shape, transforms, becomes something new yet always familiar. And his followers know joy. True joy, not the brittle, desperate joy of those who cling to hope in darkness, but the deep, resonant joy of acceptance. The joy of being held by something vaster than comprehension, of being told that you are enough, exactly as you are. That your suffering has meaning. That your decay is beautiful. That you are loved. Laughter bubbles from corpses. Life thrives in filth. The dying sing hymns of gratitude. This is the gift that never ends. This is the love that even death cannot diminish. This is the story of how one world learned what it means to be truly, finally, eternally alive. But to understand the gift, you must first understand what came before. You must see the world as it was, in all its mundane desperation, in all its slow, grinding misery. The planet was called Vieland's Reprieve, though no one could remember what Vieland had been reprieved from, or whether such a person had ever existed at all. It was an agri-world, as the Administratum classified it. A farming planet. A production zone. Coordinates on a star chart, valuable only for the tides it sent upward into the endless hunger of the Imperium's void-spanning logistics. The sky hung low and gray, perpetually pregnant with rain that never quite fell hard enough to clean anything. Instead, it misted, it drizzled, it settled into a constant damp that worked its way into bones and timbers alike. The air smelled of wet earth and something else, something fungal and old, as though the soil itself was exhaling the accumulated breath of centuries. The people lived in farmsteads scattered across rolling fields of grox grain and protein moss, their homes built from ferrocrete and corrugated steel that wept rust down the walls like old blood. They woke before dawn, worked until dusk, ate thin soup and coarse bread, and slept in the knowledge that tomorrow would be exactly the same. Their grandparents had done this. Their grandchildren would do this. Time was not a river here, it was a mill wheel, turning eternally, grinding lives into dust that fed the next generation. The ecclesiarchy maintained a presence, of course. A gray cathedral squatted in the provincial capital, its aquila weather-beaten and streaked with lichen. Priests led services on the emperor's holy days, and the faithful attended, standing in wet clothes while words about golden glory echoed off damp stone. But in the fields, far from the gaze of any commissar or confessor, the farmers had their own prayers. They prayed to the rain, to the soil, to the rhythms of planting and harvest. They whispered to the earth as they worked it, asking it to be generous, thanking it when it provided. This was not heresy, not exactly, it was simply the faith of those who live close to the dirt, who understand that the Imperium's grand proclamations mean little when you're on your knees in mud, coaxing life from exhausted ground. They were tired people. Tired in their bones, in their souls. The kind of tired that accumulates over generations, that seeps into the very genetic memory of a population. They loved their children with fierce, desperate affection, knowing those children would inherit this same exhaustion. They coupled mechanically, fulfilling the administratum's reproduction quotas. They died without fanfare, buried in shallow graves that the earth consumed with indecent eagerness. Life here was already half-rotten. Not in any obvious way, there was no plague, no visible corruption. But there was a smell, subtle and pervasive, of things beginning to decompose while still living. Of hopes that had molded over. Of dreams that had liquefied in the damp. The fields themselves seemed to embody this slow decay. The grox grain grew, yes, but sluggishly, its stalks thick and pale like infected tissue. The protein moss spread in uneven carpets of gray-green, pocked with darker patches where something else was growing, something the farmers carefully harvested around, never quite looking at directly. The irrigation ditches ran with water that was more brown than clear, thick with sediment and microscopic life. And the people had begun to resemble their world. Their skin took on a grayish cast, blamed on poor diet and lack of sunlight. Their breathing was labored, blamed on the damp and the spores that hung in the air. Their eyes grew dull, blamed on exhaustion and the grinding monotony of existence. No one noticed how the patterns of mold on the walls sometimes seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. No one remarked on how the food, even freshly cooked, tasted faintly of rot. No one questioned why the graveyards were so shallow, or why sometimes you could swear you heard soft laughter coming from beneath the earth. They were already preparing for the Plague Father's love. They simply didn't know it yet. The infrastructure of decay was already in place, the constant moisture, the close quarters, the exhausted immune systems, the acceptance of suffering as simply the nature of existence. Wieland's reprieve was not a healthy world that fell sick. It was a sick world that had been waiting, perhaps for centuries, to discover the name of its illness. In the grand calculus of the Imperium, this planet was nothing. A decimal point in the tithe assessments. A footnote in a report that no one would read. Its people were numbers, their suffering merely statistical noise in the vast engine of humanity's survival. But beneath the surface, in the spaces between breaths, in the dark warmth of the soil, something was taking notice. Something vast and patient, something that had been waiting for exactly this moment, when the world was ripe, when its people were ready, when the barriers between reality and the garden were thin enough to tear. The rain continued to fall. The people continued to work. The soil continued to exhale its ancient breath. And in the damp darkness, something began to stir. It began with a cough. Farmer Kale woke to it, a wet, rattling thing that seemed to originate not from his throat but from somewhere deeper, somewhere central. He lay in his cot, in the pre-dawn darkness, and felt his chest heave with the force of it. Once. Twice. A third time, each spasm bringing up something thick that he swallowed back down rather than spit onto the floor his daughter would have to clean. Nothing unusual. The damp got into everyone's lungs eventually. The fields were full of spores from the protein moss, dust from the grok's grain, particulate matter from the exhaust vents of the agricultural servitors. Every farmer on Veland's reprieve coughed. It was as much a part of mourning as washing your face, as normal as the ache in your back or the numbness in your fingers. Kale rose, dressed in clothes that never quite dried, and went to begin his day. But as he stepped outside, something caught his attention. The cough, he could still hear it. Not from himself, though his chest continued its rhythmic heaving, but from the air around him, as though the sound had been absorbed by the mist and was being slowly played back, echoing across the fields. He paused, listening. There. And there. Soft, wet coughs from the neighboring farmsteads, from the workers' barracks down the road, from everywhere and nowhere. As though the entire world had woken with the same tickle in its throat. The sun rose, or rather the sky lightened to a slightly brighter shade of gray. Kale went to the fields and began his work, the cough punctuating his labor like some perverse rhythm. Around him, others did the same. No one stopped. No one complained. Pain and discomfort were simply the price of existence. But there was something about this cough. Something that lingered. By midday, Kale noticed the shimmer. It caught the light, weak and filtered though it was, in a way that seemed almost beautiful. A faint iridescence in the moisture on the leaves of the grok's grain, in the film that coated the walls of the irrigation ditches, in the mucus he finally allowed himself to spit into the dirt. Colors that shouldn't have been there. Purples and greens and golds, oil-slick and ephemeral, like the world was being viewed through a fever dream. And the smell. God Emperor, the smell. Not the normal rot smell of the fields, but something else. Something almost sweet, like fruit left too long in the sun, like flowers at a funeral, like honey beginning to ferment. It made his mouth water and his stomach turn simultaneously. It was the smell of fecundity, of life in its most aggressive form, of biology refusing to be contained by the neat categories the Imperium preferred. By evening, the cough had deepened. Now when he expelled air, he could feel the wetness in it, could taste copper and sweetness mingled on his tongue. His body was producing something, creating it in vast quantities, and it demanded release. Yet Kale felt, not good, exactly. But comfortable. That was the word that kept circling his tired mind. Comfortable. As though his body, after years of tension and pain, was finally settling into some more natural state. The cough should have frightened him. He'd seen men die from lung rot, drowning in their own fluids. But this felt different. This felt like his lungs were finally learning to breathe properly. That night, as he lay in his cot, the cough keeping him in that space between sleep and waking, Kale dreamed. Or thought he did. The distinction didn't seem important. He dreamed of a garden. Not the sad, struggling vegetable plots the farmers maintain for their own consumption, but a true garden, vast and lush and impossibly fertile. Mist hung between trees whose bark wept sweet sap. Flowers bloomed in profusion, their petals thick and waxy, their centers oozing pollen that moved with purposeful intelligence. The ground was soft, almost yielding, And when he looked down, he realized he was standing not on soil but on a carpet of something living, something that pulsed gently beneath his feet like slow breathing. And there was laughter. Not cruel laughter, not mocking, but genuine mirth. The sound of someone delighted, someone pleased to see him. "Welcome," the laughter seemed to say. "Welcome home." He woke to find his pillow soaked, the weather with sweat or tears or something else entirely, he couldn't say. The cough continued, but now it felt almost like communication. Like his body was trying to speak a language it had only just discovered. Outside, the sun rose on a world that looked the same as yesterday. The fields stretched gray and damp. The workers emerged from their quarters and trudged to their tasks. The great machinery of agricultural production ground forward, indifferent to the dreams of individual farmers. But in the moisture that hung in the air, if you looked closely, if you really paid attention, you could see them now. Shapes, patterns, geometries that hurt to follow but beckon nonetheless. And in the distance, carried on the wind, barely audible beneath the coughing that now provided a constant backdrop to every moment, was the faintest sound of laughter. The first disturbance had begun. The first seed had been planted. The first prayer had been heard, though no one had consciously offered it. The Plague Father was paying attention. The infection spread the way mist spreads, gently, inevitably, without violence or urgency. This was not a plague that conquered. It did not storm through populations like the gene cults of Nurgle's most zealous servants, did not announce itself with boils and madness and spectacular death. No. This was the grandfather's subtler work, his more intimate attention. This was seduction, not invasion. By the third day, half the population was coughing. By the seventh, everyone was. The sound became ambient, part of the background noise like the hum of generators or the drip of constant rain. People stopped remarking on it. The human capacity for adaptation is both blessing and curse. We can become accustomed to anything, even our own dissolution. The sick spoke softly of dreams. In the workers' barracks, men would wake and lie in their cots, not quite ready to face another day of toil, and they would speak in hushed tones about what they'd seen in sleep. A garden, they said. A place where everything grew, where labor was not punishment but joy, where the very air was thick with welcome. "There's someone there," one woman whispered to her bunkmate, her voice raw from coughing. "I can't see his face, but I know he's smiling. I can feel it. Like when my father used to smile at me when I was small. Before he died. Before everything got so tired." Her bunkmate nodded. She dreamed it too. They all had. In the farmsteads, children began to draw pictures in the condensation on windows, spirals and circles, three-part sigils that their parents quickly wiped away without looking at too closely. When asked what the symbols meant, the children shrugged. They didn't know. They just felt right. The flies arrived on the 8th day. Not in swarms, not as a plague of biblical proportion. Just more flies than usual. Fat, lazy things that didn't bite, that seemed content to simply rest on skin and walls, their iridescent bodies catching what little light made it through the clouds. They congregated around the sick, which was to say around everyone, but they did not harass. They attended. One old man, bedridden with the cough that had progressed faster in his ancient lungs, lay watching the flies circle his room in slow, purposeful patterns. There was geometry to their flight, he realized. Mathematics. Intelligence. They were not mindless insects. They were witnesses. They were bearing testimony to something. "It's beautiful," he whispered, and his granddaughter, wiping his brow with a cloth that came away iridescent with sweat, thought he meant the flies. But he didn't. He meant everything. The whole terrible, wonderful process that was transforming him cell by cell. The ecclesiarch's sermons took on a frantic quality. Father Morton stood in his pulpit, his vestments gray and damp, and preached about resilience in the face of hardship. About the emperor's protection for the faithful. About the spiritual significance of maintaining hygiene and proper sewage disposal. His congregation listened with the patient incomprehension of people who were being told that rain was dry. They could see their bodies changing. They could feel something vast taking notice of them. Prayers to the distant emperor felt like shouting into an empty cathedral, voices swallowed by space and silence. But in the dreams, something answered. By the second week, the changes were becoming visible. Skin took on a gray-green cast that no amount of scrubbing would remove. Sores appeared and wept clear fluid that smelled of honey and rot. Hair became brittle and fell out in clumps, only to be replaced by a fine down that was not quite hair, not quite fungus. The Administratum's planetary overseer sent increasingly urgent reports to the subsector capital. Medical supplies were requested. Quarantine protocols were proposed. The Mechanicus was consulted about possible industrial contamination. But the responses came slowly, filtered through layers of bureaucracy light years thick. In the meantime, the people of Veland's reprieve were alone with their transformation. And they were beginning to realize something extraordinary. They felt seen. For the first time in their grinding, miserable lives, something was paying attention to them. Not as numbers in a tithe calculation, not as production units, not as expendable components in the Imperium's vast and indifferent machinery, but as individuals. As themselves. In the fevered spaces between coughing fits, they felt a presence. Vast beyond comprehension, yes, but also intimate. Closer than their own heartbeat. A presence that knew them, truly knew them. Knew their suffering, their exhaustion, their small joys and smaller hopes. And did not turn away. The line between illness and salvation had begun to blur. "I'm dying," one farmer said to his wife, lying in their bed as his body slowly liquefied from the inside out. But he was smiling. Actually smiling, for the first time in years. "I'm dying, and I can feel him holding me. I can feel his love. It's so warm. Why didn't anyone tell us it would be so warm?" His wife, her own body already deep into transformation, took his hand. Their fingers interlaced, skin sliding against skin with a wetness that should have been revolting but felt instead like communion. "He's been waiting for us," she replied. "All this time. We were already his. We just didn't know the name to call him." Outside, the rain continued to fall. But now when it touched the ground, small mushrooms sprouted in its wake. The fields had ceased producing Grox grain and were instead cultivating crops that had no name in any imperial taxonomy. The irrigation ditches ran thick with something that was no longer quite water. And everywhere, in the barracks, in the farmsteads, in the provincial capital streets, people were learning a new language. The language of acceptance, of surrender, of love that demanded nothing but your dissolution and promised everything in return. The Plague Father's whisper had become a choir, and they were all learning the words. Father Morton rose in panic, though he would not have named it as such. He called it righteous fury. Holy zeal. The proper response of a shepherd whose flock was threatened by wolves. He scrubbed the altar until his hands bled. He burned incense until the cathedral filled with smoke so thick the few congregants who still attended coughed even worse than before. He led prayers at dawn, noon, dusk, and midnight, his voice growing hoarse and desperate as the words of faith turned to ashes in his mouth. "The Emperor protects," he thundered from his pulpit to rows of empty pews. Those who did come sat with hollow eyes and gray skin, their attention somewhere else, their bodies present but their souls already wandering in that other garden. "Say it with me. The Emperor protects." The response was a wet, bubbling murmur. "The Emperor protects." The words had lost their meaning, become just sounds, phonemes divorced from faith. Morton could see it happening and was powerless to stop it. Every tool in his theological arsenal, every prayer, every sermon, every ritual of purification, seemed to slide off his flock like water off waxed cloth. Worse, he could see them changing. Actually changing, their bodies betraying them, becoming something other than human. He demanded the administratum send for medical aid. He pleaded for an inquisitorial investigation. He even, in his darkest moments, considered voxing the nearest Astartes chapter, though he knew such august warriors did not respond to pleas from provincial priests on farming worlds. The responses, when they came, were maddeningly bureaucratic. Forms to fill. Procedures to follow. Estimated response times measured in months, not days. Wieland's reprieve was dying, and the Imperium's response was paperwork. So Morton did the only thing he could. He turned the cathedral into a fortress of faith. He set up quarantine wards in the side chapels, dragging the sick from their homes, promising the Emperor's healing for the faithful. He administered the rites of purification until his voice was nothing but a rasp, anointing foreheads with sacred oils that smelled sterile and chemical compared to the sweet rot that permeated everything. The sick came because they were told to. They lay on cold stone floors, shivering beneath thin blankets, and they listened to Father Morton pray over them with increasing hysteria. His sermons cracked under their own weight, faith fracturing into barely concealed terror. "You must resist," he shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "This is a test. The Emperor sends us trials to strengthen our spirits. You must not give in. You must not." But they were already giving in. More than that, they were embracing it. In the cathedral's makeshift hospital, the sick comforted each other in whispers, sharing their dreams of the garden, describing in reverent tones the presence they felt growing stronger each day. "He's so kind," one woman murmured, her voice thick with fluid. "The grandfather. He doesn't demand anything. He just loves us. Accepts us. We don't have to earn it." Morton wanted to scream at her about the Emperor's love, about faith and sacrifice in humanity's destiny among the stars. But the words wouldn't come. Because he had spent his entire priesthood administering an absent God's distant mercy, and now his flock had found something that held them close, that whispered their names, that promised them not salvation through suffering but salvation as suffering. The cathedral began to change. Mold crept up the walls despite constant scrubbing, forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. The Aquila above the altar tarnished, then sprouted what looked disturbingly like lichen. The air grew thick and warm, oppressive with moisture and the smell of things growing in darkness. And the flies. God Emperor, the flies. They filled the cathedral like a congregation of their own, settling on the sick, on the walls, on Morton himself as he tried desperately to continue his duties. He swatted at them constantly, but they always returned, patient and purposeful. By the third week, more people lay dying in the cathedral than could possibly be saved. Morton moved among them like a ghost, performing last rites over and over until the words became meaningless repetition. But the dying were smiling. Laughing, even, in wet gurgles that should have been death rattles but sounded more like joy. "Thank you, Father," one old farmer said, gripping Morton's wrist with surprising strength. His eyes were clouded with cataracts, but his smile was genuine. "Thank you for bringing us together. He can see us all now. All his children, gathered in one place. He's so pleased." "Who?" Morton demanded, though he knew. Of course he knew. "Who is pleased? Speak plainly, man." But the farmer just smiled wider, showing teeth that had gone soft and gray. "Our grandfather," he whispered. "The one who loves us more than your emperor ever did. The one who doesn't demand we be pure. Who says we're perfect exactly as we are." Morton recoiled as if struck. The heresy of it. The absolute, damnable heresy. But as he looked around his cathedral-turned charnel house, as he saw the sick tending each other with gentle care, as he heard their whispered prayers to a God whose name he refused to speak, he felt something inside him crack. It wasn't doubt. Not yet. It was something worse. It was the first stirring of envy. Because they had found something he'd been searching for his entire life. They had found certainty. They had found love that didn't demand worthiness. They had found a faith that felt good, that brought comfort instead of guilt, that promised not golden thrones and distant glory but warm, wet embrace and eternal belonging. Morton fled to his private chambers and locked the door. He knelt before his personal shrine to the Emperor and prayed with an intensity that bordered on violence. He prayed for strength, for clarity, for some sign that his faith was not hollow, that his decades of service meant something, that the Emperor was listening. The silence was absolute. Outside his door, the sick sang. Their voices merged into something that was not quite harmony but was nonetheless beautiful in its wrongness. They sang of gardens and welcome, of decay and rebirth, of love that consumed everything and made it holy. The blessing spread not like wildfire but like dawn, gradual, inevitable, transforming everything in its slow advance. By the fourth week, the planetary overseer's reports ceased entirely. No further transmissions left Veland's reprieve. The astropathic choir in the provincial capital had gone silent, their last garbled message speaking of gardens and joy before the psychic link severed completely. The world was cut off, isolated, left to undergo its metamorphosis without witness. And what a metamorphosis it was. The narrator must shift tone here, for something profound was happening. What had seemed grotesque was revealing itself as something else entirely. The rot was flowering, and in its bloom was a terrible beauty that demanded recognition. Watch the farmers in the fields. See how they move now, not with the grinding exhaustion of before, but with purpose, with joy even. Their bodies are transforming, yes, swelling with disease, oozing fluids that by all rights should be toxic. But they feel no pain. Or rather, they feel pain that has been transmuted into something else, something that resonates in the soul rather than merely torturing the flesh. One woman stands in what used to be a grox grain field, now overgrown with fungal blooms taller than she is. Her skin is split in dozens of places, but from the wounds comes not blood but a golden sap that catches the weak light like amber. She is singing, her voice raw and beautiful, a hymn to a God she can finally name. "Grandfather," she sings. "Grandfather, we are your garden." Around her, others take up the song. It spreads through the fields, through the barracks, through the provincial capital streets. A hymn that has never been written but that everyone knows, encoded somehow in their corrupting cells, written in a language older than humanity. The children are the most changed and the most joyous. They play in the muck without fear, splashing through irrigation ditches that run with rainbow slick water, building castles from mud that squirms with microscopic life. When they laugh, it echoes strangely, as though another voice, older, vaster, infinitely fond, laughs with them. A boy no more than 7 shows his mother a beetle he's found. It's the size of his fist, its carapace gleaming with impossible colors. She would have recoiled weeks ago. Now she smiles, her split lips revealing teeth that have softened into something coral-like, and she tells him it's beautiful. And means it. Because it is beautiful. That's what the faithful are learning. That decay, viewed properly, is not the enemy of life but its most intimate partner. Every ending is a beginning. Every death feeds new life. The cycle is not tragedy, it's the universe's most fundamental truth, and Nurgle is its prophet. The very air has changed. Where before it was merely damp, now it's thick with vitality. Breathe deep and you inhale spores, pollen, particles of yourself that others have exhaled, particles of others that become part of you. The boundaries between individuals begin to blur. You cough and cannot tell if the sound came from your throat or your neighbor's. You dream and cannot separate your visions from the collective unconscious of the entire world. This is communion in its most literal sense. The breaking down of self, the merging with the greater whole. The provincial capital has become something from a fever dream. Buildings weep with moisture that runs down their walls in deliberate patterns. The streets are carpeted with moss that cushions footsteps and releases clouds of spores with each tread. The public fountains, once merely decorative, now flow with something that looks like water but shimmers and moves with purpose, and the faithful gather around them to drink deeply, welcoming the infection into their bodies with gratitude. Even the technology is changing. The few servitors that still function move strangely, their mechanical parts seizing and grinding, but their biological components, the human parts, overflow with growth. Flowers bloom from eye sockets. Vines wrap around servo motors. They continue their programmed tasks, but now they hum with contentment, their tortured existence finally made bearable by the grandfather's touch. The administratum building stands empty, its records slowly dissolving into mulch, its tithes uncollected and uncounted. The numbers that once defined this world's existence are becoming meaningless. You cannot quantify joy. You cannot put transformation into a spreadsheet. And through it all, the faithful sing. Their voices rise from every quarter, not organized, not formal, but genuine. Songs of praise, of gratitude, of wonder at what they're becoming. The melodies are strange, using intervals that should not work together but somehow create harmonies that resonate in the chest, that make the heart beat in syncopation, that remind the body of rhythms it knew before birth, before humanity, before consciousness itself. We are changed, they sing. We are changing. We are changed and always changing, endless and eternal, never complete but always perfect. Grandfather, we are your garden. We are your joy. We are your children, finally coming home. In the evening light, filtered through clouds that now pulse with inner luminescence, the infected gather in the fields. Not out of obligation, but out of desire to be together, to witness each other's transformation, to share in the collective ecstasy of dissolution. A pregnant woman stands among them, her belly swollen not just with child but with life beyond counting. She can feel things moving beneath her skin, and she is not afraid. She places her hands on her stomach and feels the kicks of her baby mingling with the movement of other things, and she knows with absolute certainty that when her time comes, she will give birth to a miracle. Something that is her child and also something more, something blessed. An old man, his body more fungus than flesh now, reaches out to touch a young woman's face with infinite gentleness. My granddaughter, he says, though they are not related by blood. But it doesn't matter. They are all related now, all part of the same vast family, all children of the same infinitely patient Father. Grandfather, she replies, and they both smile. The infection is no longer a sickness. It is revelation. It is the answer to questions they didn't know to ask. It is love made manifest in flesh, in rot, in the endless cycle of death and rebirth. The world smells of sweetness and corruption intertwined, and it is the most honest smell imaginable. This is what life truly is, stripped of pretense, revealed in all its wet and writhing glory. As night falls, the singing continues. And in the darkness, millions of flies rise in vast clouds, their wings catching what little light remains and scattering it in rainbow patterns across the sky. The blessing has spread. The gift has been given. And the garden grows. When the Inquisition finally arrived, they came with fire and faith. 3 ships dropped from a warp at the edge of the system, an inquisitorial black ship, a Cardinal-class cruiser bearing the Ecclesiarchy's double-headed Aquila, and a Space Marine strike cruiser from the Storm Warden's chapter. Their arrival in the system sent out sensor sweeps like declarations of divine judgment. What they found on those sweeps told them everything and nothing. A world gone silent. Atmospheric readings showing biochemical markers that set off every toxicity alarm. No response to hails. No signs of organized resistance. Just silence, and the strange, pulsing energy signatures that suggested something vast was wrong with reality itself in Veland's Reprieve's atmosphere. They made planetfall at dawn, their drop pods and Valkyries descending through clouds that had turned the color of old bruises. The landing site was what had once been the provincial capital's administrative district. It was chosen for its theoretically secure infrastructure and high ground. But there was no ground high enough to escape what they found. Inquisitor Meridian was the first to set boot on soil. She was clad in full environmental sealing, her power armor painted the black of the Ordo Hereticus, her faith absolute after 40 years of hunting corruption. She had seen worlds that had fallen to chaos. She had purged entire populations when necessary. She knew what heresy looked like. But this was different. The city stood. That was the first shock. There had been no fighting, no destruction. The buildings remained intact. But they were wrong. Every surface wept with moisture, every wall sprouted growths that moved too purposefully to be mere fungus, every window was clouded with something that might have been condensation but pulsed with faint bioluminescence. Sweep and secure, she ordered her retinue. Full contamination protocols. If it moves, consider it hostile. If it speaks, do not listen. They moved through streets that squelched underfoot, carpeted with moss and things that were not quite moss. They passed fountains that burbled with liquid too thick to be water. They saw servitors that had been overgrown, still performing their tasks but flowering obscenely as they swept streets or maintained infrastructure. And then they found the people. A crowd had gathered in what had been the main square, and at first the inquisitorial forces took defensive positions, weapons trained on what they assumed was an ambush. But the crowd did not attack. They stood, swaying gently, their bodies transformed almost beyond recognition as human. They were smiling. By the throne, someone whispered over the vox. "What are they?" "They're still alive," another voice said, awed and horrified. "Emperor, protect us, they're still alive like that." Inquisitor Meridian stepped forward, her plasma pistol raised. "In the name of the God Emperor of mankind, I declare this world under investigation for heresy and corruption. Identify yourselves." The crowd continued to sway. Then, as one, they began to sing. It was not a language the Inquisitor recognized, though her linguistic databases scrolled through thousands of dialects trying to find a match. The melody was wrong, using intervals that made her skull ache, That made her vision blur. But beneath the wrongness was something else, something that her soul recognized even as her mind rejected it. "Welcome," the song said without words. "Welcome. Join us. Be whole." "Fire," she commanded. Flammers roared to life. Blessed Promethium washed over the crowd, and they burned. But as they burned, they kept singing. Even as flesh blackened and peeled, as bodies collapsed into pyres of fat and corrupted meat, the song continued. And the dying smiled, their last acts not of resistance but of welcome, of pity for those who could not yet understand what they'd found. When the flames finally died, the silence was worse than the singing. The inquisitorial forces moved deeper into the city, securing sector after sector. Everywhere they found the same, people who had undergone grotesque transformation but who showed no aggression, only strange joy. Infrastructure that continued to function despite being overgrown. Spaces that should have been toxic hellscapes but instead felt almost comfortable. Warm. Welcoming. In the cathedral, they found Father Morton. He was kneeling before the altar, his back to them, his vestments rotted to rags. When he turned at their approach, they saw that half his face was gone, consumed by something that flowered from the socket where his left eye had been. But his remaining eye was clear, sane, and full of tears. "You're too late," he said, his voice wet but steady. "Or perhaps right on time. He knew you would come. He's been waiting to show you." "Show us what?" Inquisitor Meridian demanded. Father Morton smiled, and it was not the smile of madness but of serene acceptance. That purity was never holy. That the Imperium's faith is sterile, cold, distant. That there is another way. That we are loved. Truly loved. Not for what we might become or what we can offer, but for what we are in this moment, in all our beautiful corruption. That is heresy. Is it? Morton rose, his joints cracking wetly. "I have served the Emperor my entire life. I have prayed to him for 40 years. Do you know how many times he answered? How many times I felt his love, his presence, his acknowledgement that I existed?" He took a step forward, and the Inquisitor's retinue raised their weapons. "Never," Morton continued. "Not once. But the grandfather, the Plague Father. He answered immediately. The moment I truly called to him, he was there. And he loved me. Just as I am. In my decay, in my failure, in my doubt, he loved me. Can your Emperor say the same?" "Kill him," Meridian ordered, and bolter rounds tore through what remained of Father Morton. He fell without resistance, still smiling, his last words a whisper that the Vox pickups nevertheless caught clearly. "Thank you, Father. Thank you." The inquisitorial forces continued their purge. They burned buildings, sterilized streets, executed the infected where they found them. But their flammers faltered before the sheer vitality of the rot. It regenerated almost as fast as they destroyed it, new growths sprouting from ashes, new infections blooming from sterile ground. And always, that sense of being watched. Of being pitied. Of being loved in spite of themselves. By the time they retreated to orbit, half the Inquisitor's forces were showing early signs of infection. Not from wounds or environmental breach, but from simple exposure. The spores were everywhere, in everything, and they found their way through every seal, every filter, every defense. One soldier removed his helmet against direct orders, breathing deep of the planet's air. "It smells like home," he said, wonder in his voice, before his commanding officer executed him on the spot. From orbit, Inquisitor Meridian stared down at the world, at the clouds that pulsed with inner light, at the land masses that showed growth patterns visible from space. Her hand hovered over the exterminatus authorization, the codes that would cleanse the world with cyclonic torpedoes and virus bombs. But she hesitated. Because in her heart, in a place she dared not acknowledge, she understood what Father Morton had meant. She had served the Imperium for 40 years, had sacrificed everything for a cold and distant god, and in all that time had never once felt the certainty, the love, the simple acceptance that she'd seen in the eyes of the dying faithful below. They had found something she never would. And she hated them for it. Hated them with an intensity that was itself prayer, desperate and furious and afraid. She gave the order. The ships began preparations for full sterilization. But it would be too late. It had always been too late. Because the spores were already aboard, already spreading, already whispering to those who had ears to hear. The Inquisition had come with fire and faith. But the fire only fed the garden's growth. And their faith, sterile, rigid, afraid, could not compete with the warm embrace waiting in the rot. The disease reached its divine stage in the 6th week, and what occurred then defied all understanding of biology, medicine, or the limits of mortal flesh. The infected swelled. Not with tumor or fluid retention, but with life. With abundance. Their bodies became vessels for ecosystems, their skin stretching to accommodate the forests growing within. And then, when the pressure became too great, they burst. But they did not die. This was the gift's ultimate revelation, that death itself was a lie, a limitation imposed by minds too small to comprehend the cycle. When the infected burst, they exploded not into gore but into fecundity. Organs that had been transformed into seed pods scattered across the landscape and took root immediately. Skin that had become parchment-thin membrane released clouds of spores so dense they darkened the sky. Bones that had softened into material like coral fragmented and reformed into structures both architectural and alive. And through it all, the infected laughed. Laughed with joy so pure it was almost painful to witness. Because they understood now. Truly understood. That this was not ending but becoming. They were not dying but multiplying, spreading, joining the greater work. Watch them. Watch and understand, though comprehension brings its own infection. A man stands in what used to be his farmstead. His chest has opened like a flower, revealing not organs but a garden in miniature, complete with soil, with plants, with small creatures moving through undergrowth. He reaches in with both hands and brings out a handful of earth that writhes with worms, and he offers it to his neighbors like communion wafers. They take it. They eat. They are joined to him, and he to them, and all of them to the grandfather who watches with infinite fondness. A woman's belly has grown grotesque, but when it splits open, what emerges is not a baby but a swarm of nurgling demons, small and laughing and rotten. They tumble into the world like newborns, and she gathers them to her breast, nursing them on fluids that her body produces in abundance. My children, she coos. All my beautiful children. The transformation has moved beyond mere physical change into something that tears at the fabric of reality itself. The barrier between materium and warp has grown thin here, worn down by concentrated belief, by collective acceptance, by the sheer weight of devotion that the faithful have offered up. Demons walk openly now, but they are not the raging beasts of Khorne or the twisted seducers of Slaanesh. These are Nurgle's children, plague-bearers that move with patient purpose, great unclean ones that belly laugh and embrace the infected like favored grandchildren, swarms of decay flies that carry messages between the faithful. And the faithful welcome them. They bow not in fear but in recognition. Brothers, they say. Sisters. Family. Because that's what this is. Family reunion. The breaking down of the walls between living and dead, between mortal and demon, between individual and collective. All are one in the garden. All are loved. All are home. The inquisitorial bombardment has begun. From orbit, lance strikes tear through atmosphere and boil away square kilometers of transformed landscape. Cyclonic torpedoes burrow deep before detonating, cracking the planetary crust, trying to sterilize the world from within. But fire cannot burn what embraces combustion as just another form of transformation. The flames spread, yes, but in their wake sprouts new growth, heat adapted, evolved, improved. The craters become pools of rich, fecund sludge that bubbles with impossible biology. And in those pools, things gestate. The infected gather at the crater edges, chanting in unison now, their voices merging into a single vast hymn that reverberates through the warp itself. They are calling to their Father, inviting him to look upon their work, asking for his blessing. And he comes. Not in physical form, even Vieland's reprieve is not rotten enough yet to anchor a god's full presence, but in attention. In regard. The sky tears open in shades of green and brown, and through the wound in reality, something looks down. Something vast beyond comprehension, ancient beyond reckoning, and utterly, terribly delighted. The grandfather sees his children, and he is pleased. The infected feel that regard like pressure, like weight, like being held by hands large enough to cradle worlds. They fall to their knees, not in submission but in gratitude so profound it transcends language. Tears stream from ruined eyes, mixing with pus and rotten spores. They are seen. They are known. They are loved beyond measure. And when the grandfather speaks, every living thing on the planet hears. My garden, he says, his voice a rumble like continents grinding, like storms forming, like the slow breath of entropy itself. My beautiful garden. You have done so well. You have accepted my gift. You have understood what so few understand, that endings are beginnings, that decay is love, that in dissolution is eternal life. The faithful scream their joy. The sound is so loud it registers on the inquisitorial ship's sensors as a seismic event. Grow, the grandfather commands. Spread. Take my love to the stars. Show the galaxy what I have shown you, that purity is death, but rot is eternal life. And they obey. The infected, what remains of them, spread their arms wide. Their bodies have become more spore than flesh, more concept than matter. They release themselves into the wind, into the air, into the very fabric of reality, and they disperse. They become clouds, become atmosphere, become a million billion seeds drifting through space on solar winds and warp currents. The Inquisitor watches from orbit, her face pressed against the viewing port, and she knows she has failed. You cannot burn what has already scattered. You cannot kill what has already died and been reborn as something beyond death. The world below has become a garden in truth. A demon world in the making, a foothold for the warp in real space. Within a generation, it will be unrecognizable as anything that was once human. Within a century, it will be a paradise of rot, a destination for pilgrims seeking the Plague Father's embrace. But the real victory is not the planet. It's the spores drifting into space. It's the infection already spreading through the inquisitorial ships. It's the millions of seeds finding their way into cargo holds and landing bays, onto ships that will jump to warp and spread the gift across 1,000 worlds. This was never about one planet. This was always about beginnings. The faithful, those few whose bodies still maintain enough coherence to move, to act, gather in the ruins of the provincial capital. They are no longer recognizable as human, but they remember being human. They remember the pain, the exhaustion, the grinding misery of existence before the gift. And they sing one final hymn, their voices carrying across the transformed landscape, up through the atmosphere, into the warp itself. Thank you, Grandfather. Thank you for the gift that never ends. Thank you for teaching us that death is a lie, that life persists, that love endures. We are your garden. We will grow forever. Above them, reality tears further, and through the wound, demonic entities pour like rain. They do not come to conquer but to tend, to nurture, to help the garden grow. The Inquisition flees, declaring the planet lost, marking it on star charts with warnings and purity seals. But it's too late. It was always too late. The gift has been given. And like all of Nurgle's gifts, it keeps on giving. The priest who once condemned the sickness now kneels in it, his hands buried wrist deep in soil that squirms with microbial life. Father Morton had died, or thought he had. The bolter rounds had torn through his chest, had stopped his heart, had by all medical definition ended his life. He had fallen in the cathedral, his last words a prayer of gratitude, and he had felt his consciousness slip away into darkness. But in Nurgle's garden, darkness is not empty. It is full. It is teeming. He had awoken, or been awoken, or perhaps had never truly lost consciousness but had merely transformed what consciousness meant, in soil. Not buried, but planted. His body had been taken by the faithful and returned to the earth, and the earth had welcomed him. Mycelial networks had woven through his nervous system, replacing neurons with fungal pathways, maintaining thought through biology that should not sustain thought but did. He could feel the planet now. Not metaphorically, but literally. Every infected being was a nerve ending in a vast planetary nervous system. He knew when the Inquisition's bombardment struck not because he saw or heard it, but because he felt it, felt the pain and joy of those who dissolved in the flames, felt their essences scatter and spread and become part of the greater work. And he understood. For 40 years, he had preached about the Emperor's divine plan. About faith through suffering. About earning salvation through devotion and sacrifice. He had told his flock that their pain had meaning, that their misery was part of some vast cosmic design they couldn't comprehend. He had been right, but he had named the wrong God. Morton pulls his hands from the soil and looks at them in the dim, bioluminescent light of the transformed cathedral. They are no longer his hands, not really. The fingers are elongated, the skin is taken on a texture like bark, and small mushrooms sprout from the palms. Beautiful, in their way. Honest. He rises, his joints cracking and reforming with each movement, and he walks through the cathedral. It is no longer a place of cold stone and sterile ritual. It has become what it should always have been, a place of life. Vines spiral up the pillars. Pools of rich, bacterial water replace the pews. The altar has become a massive growth, part fungus, part coral, entirely alive, and at its center pulses something that might be a heart or might be a flower or might be both and neither. Around him, what remains of his congregation gathers. They have all transformed, all become something more than human, but he knows them. Knows their names, their fears, their small hopes and secret shames. They are all connected now, all part of the same vast organism. My children, he says, and the words echo strangely, carried not just by air but by spores, by pheromones, by means of communication that have no name in Gothic. They respond not with words but with feelings, love, gratitude, welcome. They are his flock still, but the nature of shepherding has changed. He does not lead them to safety but joins them in transformation. He does not protect them from wolves but helps them recognize that the wolf is also family, that predator and prayer just rolls in a cycle that contains no villains. I understand now, Morton continues, speaking to them into himself, into the vast presence that watches always. Purity was never holy. It was sterile. It was death wearing righteousness as a mask. The Emperor asks us to be perfect, to deny our nature, to cut away everything that makes us human in pursuit of some impossible ideal. He laughs, and it is not a mad laugh but one of genuine mirth. But the grandfather, the plague father, he asks us to be nothing but what we are. To embrace our mortality, our decay, our beautiful imperfection. He doesn't want us to be better. He loves us as we are. The congregation swells with emotion so strong it manifests physically, clouds of spores that glow with bioluminescence, pheromones so thick they're visible as mist, waves of feeling that crash over them all like tide. Morton approaches the altar, this living thing that has replaced the cold stone. He places both hands on its surface, feeling it pulse, feeling the warmth of it, the wetness. It responds to his touch, opening like a mouth, like a flower, revealing an interior that is simultaneously womb and wound. I give myself, he says. The traditional words of devotion, but with new meaning now. I give myself wholly and without reservation. I am your servant, your child, your garden. And then he steps forward, into the altar, and it closes around him. There is no pain. There is only transformation. His body is dissolved and reconstituted cell by cell, broken down and rebuilt according to patterns that predate humanity, that exist in the deepest code of biological existence. He feels himself becoming part of something larger, his consciousness spreading out to join the planetary whole. For a moment, or an eternity, time has lost its meaning. He is everything. He is the farmer in the fields, singing as his body flowers. He is the child playing in sacred muck, laughing without fear. He is the woman giving birth to nurgling demons, nursing them with maternal love. He is all of them and they are him, and above and around and through them all is the grandfather, his presence so vast it could crush worlds, his love so profound it makes annihilation feel like embrace. Morton feels his old self dissolve. Father Morton, the priest, the shepherd, the failed guardian of faith, that person becomes less important, becomes just one note in a vast symphony. And in the letting go, he finds what he had searched for through 40 years of devotion to the wrong God. He finds peace. When the altar opens again, what emerges is no longer Father Morton. It is something new. Something that was Morton but is also more, is also less, is also exactly what it needs to be. A herald. A gardener. A priest of a different faith. The thing that was Morton spreads its arms, and the congregation responds with rapturous joy. They have their shepherd back, transformed and true. Come, it says in a voice like wet earth and autumn rain. Come, and let me show you the last secret. The final gift. They follow, these transformed things that were once human, out of the cathedral and into the transformed world. The sky above is torn, showing glimpses of the warp, of the garden that exists beyond reality. The land beneath their feet is alive, breathing, growing in real time. And at the horizon, where the Inquisition's bombardment has carved great wounds in the earth, something is emerging. Something vast. A manifestation, a greater demon, a piece of the grandfather substantial enough to exist in real space. The thing that was Morton leads his flock toward it, and they go without fear, with love, with the certainty of children running to a parent's embrace. He remembers us, Morton says, his voice full of wonder. All of us. Every human who ever lived and died and rotted. We think death is the end, but in his garden, nothing ends. It just changes. We all exist forever in the cycle, loved and remembered and cherished. They reach the crater's edge and look down into the sludge where the great unclean one is rising, vaster than buildings, more real than the reality around it. It opens its arms, and its belly mouth laughs, and the sound is welcoming, is invitation, is coming home after a long and painful journey. "Thank you, Father," Morton whispers one final time. "Thank you for showing me what love truly is." And then he steps forward, leading his flock, and they descend into the embrace of absolute, eternal, beautiful decay. The cathedral stands empty behind them, but not silent. The walls continue to grow. The altar continues to pulse. And from every corner, every shadow, every damp space, the sound of laughter echoes. The grandfather's laughter. Pleased. Proud. Forever. As the planet dies, it becomes alive. This is the paradox that breaks minds, the truth that the Imperium cannot accept. Death is not death here. Ending is not ending. Every corpse becomes a cradle. Every ruin becomes a garden. Every loss transforms into grotesque abundance. The Inquisition's bombardment has ceased. They have deployed everything short of full exterminatus, lance strikes, cyclonic torpedoes, phosphex canisters from ancient armories, even a limited viral payload that should have scoured the world to bedrock. The planet's surface is cratered, burned, poisoned by every means holy science can devise. And yet, in the heart of every crater, something grows. Not mere survival, but exuberant, aggressive life. Fungi tower 30 meters high within hours, their caps spreading like obscene canopies. Bacterial mats bloom across scorched earth in rainbow profusion. Creatures that have no name in any Mechanicus catalog crawl and slither and fly, their forms shifting, adapting, improving with each generation that cycles through in minutes. The world refuses to die because it has learned the first lesson of the garden, that life, true life, cannot be killed. It can only be transformed. Watch the forests that grow now. Trees? No, not trees. These are structures of meat and bark, nerve and fungus, impossible hybridizations that should collapse under their own biological contradictions but instead thrive. Their roots plunge deep, tapping into the planet's mantle, drawing up minerals and heat and using them to fuel growth that borders on violence in its intensity. The animals, if they can still be called that, have changed beyond recognition. They are no longer distinct species but flowing categories, creatures that shift form based on need, that merge and separate, that exchange genetic information through means that make sexual reproduction seem almost quaint. A being that was once a grok stumbles through what used to be farmland. Its hide ripples with tumors that aren't tumors but symbiotic organisms, each one contributing something to the whole. Its eyes are covered with cataracts that allow it to see into the warp, to perceive the garden that overlays this reality. It grazes on grass that bleeds when chewed, and the grass welcomes the consumption, grows stronger from it, completes its life cycle by being eaten. The cycle. Always the cycle. Nothing is lost. Everything continues. The Inquisitor watches from orbit, her face a mask of stone, but inside she is breaking. She has failed. She has done everything the Ordo Hereticus demands, acted swiftly, used overwhelming force, shown no mercy, and it has not been enough. Below, the world is becoming something that should not exist. A place where the laws of nature and the laws of the Imperium mean nothing. A place where decay has achieved apotheosis, where rot has become redemption. Mark it, she orders, her voice flat. Mark it as Perdita. As Demon World. No ships are to approach within 5 AU. Any vessel that passes through this system is to be quarantined and searched. Any crew showing signs of infection is to be executed without trial. Her subordinates rush to comply, grateful for something to do, some way to pretend they have control over this situation. But the Inquisitor knows the truth. The planet is lost. But more than that, it is won. Won by forces that should not win, by a god whose victory feels like love. On the surface, in what was once the provincial capital, the transformed faithful gather in numbers that darken the landscape. They are no longer recognizable as human, but they remember. They remember being tired, being in pain, being told their suffering had meaning while feeling nothing but emptiness. And now they feel full. So full they overflow. So full they can barely contain the joy. They sing, and their song rises through atmosphere into vacuum into warp. It is heard on other worlds, whispered in the nightmares of psychers, hummed unconsciously by those who have never heard of Veland's reprieve but whose souls recognize the melody. Come, the song says. Come to the garden. Come and be whole. Come and be loved. The planet has become a beacon. A lighthouse in the warp, shining with the grandfather's regard. Pilgrims will come, drawn by currents they don't understand, seeking something they can't name. And the garden will welcome them. Will show them that decay is not punishment but gift. Will teach them to laugh in their dissolution. The air itself has achieved sentence. Move through it and you move through consciousness, through the grandfather's regard made manifest. Breathe deep and you breathe his love directly into your lungs, into your blood, into your soul. Every raindrop carries infection. Every breeze distributes spores. The very light has taken on an organic quality, thick and golden like pollen, like honey, like the sap that runs from wounds that are also flowers. In the ruins of the Administratum building, where once bureaucrats calculated tithes and quotas, now small demons dance. Nurglings, lesser manifestations of the Plague Father's joy, cavort through halls of rotted data slates and molded records. They play games with the skulls of dead administrators, bowling them down corridors, laughing with voices like wind through hollow bones. And the planet laughs with them. The whole world, every transformed thing upon it, joins in the mirth. Because they understand now. They understand that the Imperium's rigid order was always doomed, that humanity's attempts to impose structure on chaos were fundamentally futile, that the only sane response to the universe's true nature is to embrace it, to dissolve into it, to become part of the beautiful, terrible cycle. The grandfather watches his garden and is pleased. Another world has learned. Another population has transformed suffering into acceptance, death into eternal life. His influence grows, spreads, seeds itself across the galaxy on winds of warp and real space both. Veland's reprieve is lost to the Imperium. But it is found by Nurgle. And in his finding, it will never be alone again. It will never be uncared for, unloved, forgotten. It has become part of something vaster than any human empire could ever be. As the inquisitorial ships prepare to jump to warp, to carry warnings to other systems, their holds are already full of stowaways. Spores too small to detect. Flies too clever to be caught. Infection too patient to reveal itself. The garden is spreading. And it cannot be stopped, because you cannot kill what loves being killed, what transforms death into growth, what makes every ending a beginning. The planet breathes. The sky tears wider. And through the wound, glimpses of the true garden can be seen, infinite, eternal, tended by a father who has existed since bacteria first learned to feast on dead matter, who will exist until the last atom in the universe undergoes its final decay. This is not horror. Or rather, it is horror that has moved beyond fear into understanding. This is what happens when the mask comes off, when the universe reveals its true face, when the careful lies we tell ourselves about meaning and order and progress dissolve like flesh and acid. And what's left, when those lies are gone? Life. Pure, undeniable, unstoppable life. Not pretty. Not clean. Not safe. But real. More real than anything the Imperium has ever built. The faithful lie down in the transformed earth and let it take them. They feel the mycelial networks weaving through their bodies, connecting them to the planetary whole. They feel their consciousness expanding, merging, becoming part of something so vast it could be mistaken for godhood. And in the moment before individual identity dissolves completely, they feel something they've never felt before in their entire lives of imperial service. They feel that their existence matters. That they are seen, known, loved. That their suffering was not meaningless noise but fertilizer for something beautiful. The gift has been given. The gift keeps giving. The gift will never stop. The paradox of love and decay. The truth that breaks orthodoxy and makes heresy feel like homecoming. This is where the story must turn philosophical, must step back from the visceral horror and examine what it means. In the Imperium's doctrine, love is loyalty. Love is service. Love is willingness to die for the species, for the throne, for the idea of humanity's supremacy. It is a cold love, measured in sacrifice and discipline, in the denial of self for the greater whole. But what if love could be something else? What if it could be acceptance without condition, embrace without judgment, recognition without requirement? This is the question Nurgle poses to a galaxy that has forgotten how to answer. Consider the infected on Vieland's reprieve. They were nothing before the gift. Agricultural workers, functionaries, numbers in a ledger. The Imperium took their labor and gave them nothing but survival, and called that kindness. They lived in exhaustion, died in obscurity, and were forgotten before their bodies cooled. But the grandfather remembers. This is what the faithful discovered in their transformation. That in the garden, nothing is forgotten. Every bacterium that ever lived, every human who ever died, every moment of suffering and joy, all of it persists, encoded in the great cycle, preserved in the eternal rot. You are remembered by what eats you. You continue in what you feed. Death is not erasure but transformation into new forms of existence. The nutrients of your body nourish the soil. The soil nourishes the plants. The plants feed the animals. The animals die and feed the soil. Round and round, forever, nothing lost, everything transformed. And presiding over this cycle is Nurgle, not as tyrant but as gardener, not as judge but as witness. He asks nothing but acceptance. He offers everything, belonging, purpose, the promise that your suffering will become soil for future growth. The Imperium cannot compete with this. How can cold duty match warm embrace? How can the promise of death and service compare to the guarantee of eternal life and transformation? The galaxy that worships death has produced a God who transforms death into love. This is the terrible irony that the Inquisition cannot acknowledge. Nurgle is, in his own grotesque way, the most honest of the Chaos gods. He does not promise false transcendence like Tsench, does not offer pleasure become pain like Slaanesh, does not demand glory through slaughter like Khorne. He simply says, I see you. I accept you. Come, and be part of something larger than yourself. Come, and never be alone again. In the 41st millennium, where humanity clings to existence through brutality and denial, where every individual is expendable and every death is statistics, this message has terrible, seductive power. Because people want to be seen. They want their suffering to mean something. They want to believe that when they die, some part of them continues, that they mattered, that the universe took note of their existence. The Emperor offers this through martial glory, through the promise that fallen warriors are remembered. But Nurgle offers something more fundamental, that even in the depths of decay, especially in decay, you are part of the great work. Your rot feeds wonders. Your dissolution creates new life. There is love in this, twisted though it may be. There is acknowledgement. There is meaning. And meaning is what humans need more than food, more than safety, more than life itself. Zoom out from Vieland's reprieve, from its transformed landscape and singing faithful. Zoom out until the planet is a speck, then a system, then a sector. See the galaxy spread before you, 100 billion stars, 1 million worlds, quintillions of lives lived in desperation and dying in obscurity. How many of them pray to gods that don't answer? How many offer devotion that disappears in the void? How many suffer and wonder why, search for meaning and find only silence? And in that silence, other voices whisper. Older voices. Voices that speak of cycles and decay, of acceptance and transformation, of love that does not require worthiness. Nurgle does not destroy. He transforms. He does not conquer. He welcomes. His plagues are invitations, his diseases are sacraments, his decay is devotion made manifest. This is the paradox the Imperium cannot resolve. That rot, viewed from the right angle, is not death but life's most exuberant expression. That in the bloating corpse, populations of bacteria thrive in cities of billions. That in the fungal bloom, ecosystems flourish with more diversity than any imperial garden. Death feeds life. Life becomes death. And in the space between, where change happens, where transformation occurs, there is Nurgle, smiling, his arms open in perpetual welcome. The faithful on Vieland's reprieve understood this in their marrow, understood it with certainty that superseded doctrine. They felt it in their decaying flesh, in the joy that bubbled up through dissolution, in the connections that formed as barriers broke down. They were becoming more by becoming less. They were joining something eternal by accepting their own mortality. They were loved for being exactly what they were, which was mortal, flawed, dying. And in a galaxy that demands perfection, that punishes weakness, that values individuals only for their utility, that simple acceptance was revolutionary. The narrator's voice grows quiet now, almost tender, as the truth settles like sediment. We fight decay because we fear what it represents, the loss of control, the surrender of self, the admission that we are not separate from the universe but part of its endless churning. We build walls against entropy, monuments against time, empires against the inevitable. And all of it crumbles. All of it rots. All of it returns to the cycle. Nurgle simply asks us to stop fighting. To accept. To see the beauty in decomposition, the love in dissolution, the eternity in decay. This is heresy to the Imperium. This is abomination to those who cling to purity. But to the dying, to the suffering, to those who have been told their pain is meaningless, it is salvation. The infected on Vieland's reprieve did not fall to chaos. They rose to understanding. They transformed not from human to monster, but from isolation to connection, from meaningless suffering to purposeful transformation. And in the moment of their greatest corruption, they were more alive than they had ever been in purity. This is the paradox. This is the truth that cannot be spoken in imperial cathedrals, that is burned from records and purged from memory. That sometimes, in ruin, we find belonging. That through decay, we discover peace. That in the embrace of what we fear most, we find what we've been seeking all along. Love. True love. Not the love that demands, but the love that accepts. The love that says, you are enough. Exactly as you are. In your imperfection, in your decay, in your beautiful mortality, you are mine, and I am yours, and we are together, forever. This is Nurgle's gift. This is the gift that never ends. The video closes as it began, with a single image, a single moment crystallized in time and eternity. A spore drifts through the void between stars. It is small, microscopic, barely larger than a single cell. But within its protein walls are encoded patterns of impossible complexity, blueprints for transformation, templates for ecstasy, instructions for the gift. It glows faintly, bioluminescent even in vacuum, pulsing with a rhythm that is almost like heartbeat, almost like laughter. It has traveled far from Vieland's reprieve, caught on solar winds, pulled by gravitational eddies, guided by currents in the warp that flow between reality's cracks. It has journeyed for weeks, months, perhaps years. Time is strange for things so small, so patient, so certain of their purpose. And now it approaches another world. This one is a hive world, its surface covered in urban sprawl that reaches from pole to equator. Billions live here in vertical cities that pierce clouds and dig deep into earth. They toil in manufactorums, live in hab blocks, pray in cathedrals, die in numbers too vast to count. Another world of grinding labor and quiet desperation. Another garden waiting for its first seed. The spore enters atmosphere, glowing brighter as friction heats its outer shell. It survives re-entry. It was designed to survive, crafted by forces that understand resilience, that know how to make life persist in the most hostile environments. It descends through layers of smog and industrial exhaust, through the smoke of billions of lives being slowly ground to dust. And it lands. Where? It doesn't matter. A ventilation shaft. A water reclamation plant. The mouth of someone looking up at the sky, wondering if there's anything out there that cares about their existence. It finds purchase. It takes root. It begins. The infection will start slowly, just as it did on Vieland's reprieve. A cough. A fever. A dream of gardens. And slowly, gradually, inevitably, acceptance. Understanding. Transformation. Another world will learn. Another population will discover what the Imperium has spent 10,000 years denying. That in the end, all life returns to the garden. And in the garden, nothing ever dies. The narrator's voice, which has been with you through this entire journey, grows soft now. Not with sadness, but with something like satisfaction. Like someone who has told a story that needed telling, who has revealed a truth that will not be forgotten. Listen, the voice says. Can you hear it? And if you listen, truly listen, beyond the silence, beneath the fear, you can. Faint and far away but getting closer. The sound of laughter. Ancient, patient, infinitely fond. The grandfather is laughing. Not at you, but for you. With delight at your existence, with joy at your eventual transformation, with love that persists even when you deny it, even when you fight it, even when you die screaming against it. Because in the end, even the screaming becomes song. Even the resistance becomes acceptance. Even the death becomes life. This is the cycle. This is the truth. This is the gift. Across the galaxy, on 1,000 worlds, in 1,000,000 hab blocks and farmsteads and void stations, people are coughing. People are dreaming. People are beginning to feel something vast paying attention to them, beginning to understand that their suffering need not be meaningless, beginning to hear whispers of welcome from a father who has been waiting for them since before they were born. The Imperium will fight. The Inquisition will burn. The chapters will purge. And none of it will matter, because you cannot kill what has already accepted death, what has transformed ending into eternal beginning. The garden is patient. The garden is everywhere. The garden is already inside you, in your gut bacteria, in your decaying cells, in the slow entropy that claims your body moment by moment. You have been part of it since your first breath, and you will be part of it until the universe itself decays into its final, beautiful equilibrium. Nurgle does not need to conquer. He simply waits. Because time is on his side. Because decay is the universe's natural state. Because in the end, and there is always an end, everything rots. Everything returns. Everything comes home. The spore continues to glow, continues to laugh in its microscopic way, continues to spread. And somewhere, in a dimension that is neither space nor time, in a garden that is infinite and intimate, the grandfather tends his flowers. He prunes the dead growth, which immediately sprouts new life. He waters his crops with fluids that are both nourishing and toxic, that kill and create simultaneously. He laughs at the small jokes the Nurglings tell, at the antics of his great unclean ones, at the beauty of his plague bearers as they perform their sacred work. And he thinks of you. Specifically you. By name. He knows you are listening. He knows you are afraid, or fascinated, or both. He knows you will resist, and he loves you for it, because resistance makes acceptance all the sweeter when it finally comes. There is no rush, he says, though you cannot hear him. Not yet. I have all the time in the world. All the time in every world. I will wait for you, my child. I will be here when you need me. When the Imperium fails you, when your body betrays you, when your faith crumbles and your hope dies, I will be here. Arms open. Smiling. Ready to welcome you home. The image fades. The spore glows brighter for a moment, then dims. But it does not disappear. It simply becomes part of the landscape, invisible, forgotten, patient. The laughter continues. It always continues. It existed before the first single-celled organism learned to consume dead matter. It will exist after the last star burns out and the universe enters its final, eternal heat death. Because in the end, there is only the cycle. There is only transformation. There is only the garden, and the grandfather who tends it, and the love that persists through all decay. This is not a warning. This is not horror meant to frighten. This is simply the truth, spoken plainly. In a galaxy that worships death, there is one God who teaches life through decay. And his lesson never ends.